Welcome to an episode of Jay Leno's Garage. This is an episode we call Assess and Caress. We have three cars from the Aldrin Automobile Museum in Newport, Rhode Island. These cars are brought to us thanks to reliable carriers. They transport them all over the country. You've probably seen them on the highways. With us today with his salmon-colored pants is Donald Osborne, or Fish Pants as I call him. Anyway, I believe this is the first time we've ever had salmon-colored pants on the show, so we want to welcome all salmon-colored pants owners to join the program as well. What do we have today? What's the theme?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very welcoming introduction,
Yes,
Jay.
yes.
I feel so much at home here. I feel like I just want to leap up the river just to
all
be
right,
here.
okay. FP as we call them.
Exactly. What we have here are three vehicles which I think really tell the story quite well that conventional wisdom is often quite wrong. We've got a 1957 Morgan Plus 4, a 1962 Chevrolet Corvair Monza Spyder Club Coupe,
Right.
and a 1952 Jaguar XK120 M fixed head coupe.
Now, is it Jaguar or Jaguar?
It is three syllables. Now, depending on who you speak with in the UK, they think that Americans overpronounce the third syllable in Jaguar because it's almost a mute syllable, but it has to be there. So it's not Jaguar, it's Jaguar. So depending on how you want to put it. Now, there's only two syllables, however, in Morgan and three in Chevrolet.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, that
Names.
cleared it up for
Well,
me, yeah.
It should have. People talk about the English pronunciation of foreign names.
Right.
Why does no one have a problem with Chevrolet? No one says Chevrolet.
Right.
Louis Chevrolet would be very pleased that his name is being pronounced properly by billions of people around the world.
All right.
So
Again, so now which car are we starting with?
we're going to start with the Jaguar.
All right. And this is a beautiful Jaguar.
It is a lovely Jaguar.
Yeah.
This is a car that, for me, really is the absolute essence of the post-war Jaguar. The XK120 fixed head coupe, or coupe, as people would say in the UK. The form of this is so absolutely amazing. I know you and I both love the 1930s French coach-built cars, and that was
Right.
very much the inspiration for William Lyons in creating this car. It has just this incredible flow, just sitting here. It just feels like speed, it feels like elegance, it's amazing looking car.
Well, when this car came out, at the time in England possessed the three fastest road-going vehicles. World's fastest motorcycle, Vincent Black's Shadow. World's fastest sports car, XK120, and world's fastest two-door saloon, the Bentley Continental. So and it really was cutting edge. You know, when you think about it, there's no reason why, because America seemed to be leading in automotive ideas, V8s and that type of thing. And all of a sudden, this comes along in 1948, twin cam 6, which was unbelievable. We didn't get a twin cam until the Pontiac in the 60s with that overhead cam 6, and even that was like, people were a little suspicious. You know. This is still one of the great cars, and it's a classic, although there's really no official British racing green. Every year I meet half a dozen people who have a version of British racing green. Some are lighter, some are darker. This, to me, is what British racing green should look like. I'm not even sure if they called it British racing.
They did not call this British Racing Green. I can't actually remember the exact name of this color, but this car also is one of those cars that just looks like a sports car should look.
Right.
It's got that whole long hood, short deck thing, which comes from the greatest designs of the 1930s. And yet, it is such, as you mentioned before, such an incredibly modern car underneath. To drive this car, as we both have, you realize that in 1948, it felt like you were driving a car from 1960. The
Right.
dynamic capabilities were amazing. Very much like a Bentley from the 1930s, that
Right.
all of a sudden you leapt forward a decade just getting behind the wheel. And this particular car, which came to the Aldrin collections from the great collection of Nicholas Begovic, as did the Corvair, we'll talk about that.
As
in a moment.
did my Tabalago over there. Yeah.
Exactly. And Nick Begovic was a fellow who certainly knew about engineering and engineering solutions, and he bought this car new and drove it quite a bit, especially for Nick Begovic.
This
So
is a
this car's-
one-owner car with 28,000 miles on it.
Exactly.
It's pretty amazing. Nick was quite a character. He had his Lamborghini Miura, which is also at the Aldrin Museum, has 800 miles on it. He bought it new and just kind of parked it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's just interesting. He had a whole bunch of cars, Pegasos and everything. But let's get...
This one he drove, and
Yeah.
one of the things about this, and where the theme of conventional wisdom is wrong, is that a lot of people consider that, first of all, XK120s are undrivable for people of normal stature because they are so tight inside. Not necessarily true.
You know, it's kind of true. It's kind of true. When I have a coupe, it is a bit of a chore to drive it. You have to, I wouldn't want to take a long trip in it. In the wintertime, it's fabulous, so cozy with a nice heater, and especially if you're in New England, if you don't mind being, but it really is cramped. I think anybody over 6 foot or over 5'11", because I barely fit in it.
Well, normal-sized people, Jay, such as myself, fit quite comfortably in.
Well, that's because you're this way. You see, I'm this way. When you're this way, you can fit right in it. When you're this way, oh, it's a little different. Yeah.
It is not as cramped inside as many people perceive it to be.
Well,
And yes, obviously the Roadsters are easier to drive because you've got things.
Sit behind the wheel. I'll throw some gasoline on the rug and throw a match in. Let's see how quickly you can get out. I mean, that's how quick you would burn to death by the time you got out.
Well,
of this.
when you're motivated, I think that you can move a lot more quickly.
Right.
The other thing that people say is that the car is an absolute hot box inside, no ventilation whatsoever. Now, of course, again, that is wrong. It's got these wonderful fender vents. It's got front quarter windows and rear quarter window opening, as well as a fully rolled down window.
Right.
Once you get this car opened up and you drive it, there's plenty of airflow inside this car.
Yeah, but I could see how, in New England, I think you could get away with that. In California, I think it'd just be too hot to drive, because I rarely take mine out in the summer.
You need to get out more,
Yeah.
Jay.
Well, I have the convertible one, which I like. But
which is even hotter because the sun is
But
beating
to
down on
me,
your
Jaguar is one of the few companies that makes a coupe that's more attractive than the convertible. The XK coupe is the ultimate sexy car, the way the door opens this way with the handle, and it's very cool. This looks like what the English would call a Dan Dare car, you know, a thrilling kind of character, like a James Bond kind of character, you know, just with this roof and the coat. You feel like you're in a one-book library in England. You know, you've got all this beautiful wood and leather surround you. It's a wonderful place to be, but it is a little cramped, yeah.
Well, again, we will agree to disagree because I think this car is much more comfortable than most people who have never sat in one.
Okay, but again, it's because of this way, not this way. But
now, one of the things actually that Nick Begovich did to make the car more comfortable for him to drive is that he actually put in a later, smaller diameter wood rim wheel.
Right.
We've replaced the with
Nick
the original wheel.
Nick was a man on the shorter side, right?
No, he was tall. He was tall. He was tall and thin.
Was he as tall as
Yeah.
me? I don't think
Oh, yeah.
so. Was
Yeah.
he? Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe he was. I guess
Yeah.
he was.
It's a wonderful picture of him standing next to his new 904 where he towers over the car like
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
But of course, that's a very low car. But the other thing about this car, again, going back to its performance, especially as it relates to the period, is the fact that this was a genuine 125 mile per hour car on the road.
Right.
Now, they did the 150 miles per hour at the Jabucky Speedway, but that was a car that had been very, very heavily fettled.
And it really, you know who had one of these and raced it? Walter Cronkite. Mm-hmm. I would have dinner with Walter occasionally, and who talked with a thick Oklahoma accent, by the way. It's very funny, because he puts on, hello, this is Walter Cronkite. Good day, and this is the new, you know, he put the voice on, but he was a real car guy, and he really didn't make the kind of money you make now being a newscaster. Mm-hmm. But he would race at Watkins Glen with his 120 Jaguar, and the other guy, Dave Garroway. He had one too.
An SS 100.
Because the Corvette had just come out, kinda, but it didn't have the performance of this.
Thinking about that, I'm glad you brought that up. 1952. Mm-hmm. In 1953, the Corvette would come out with its Blue Flame 6 and Power Glide, and you could have this instead, which is like a rocket on wheels.
Right. Let's take a look under the hood here.
And being the M spec, what they call the special equipment in the UK, it's got higher lift cams and delivered another 20 horsepower. So it's really
it was 160 from the factory.
160, 180,
180
in the M spec.
Right.
And there was a higher spec available as well, which basically took it to a 3.4 configuration like the C-type race cars.
Right.
But this is an absolutely astonishing piece of kit to drive in the 1950s.
Oh yeah, but they were all 3.4 liter.
All 3.4 liter.
That didn't change.
Correct.
Just different camshafts.
Different camshafts, different carburetors. Right. The Ultimate, I think, is a 3 Weber setup.
Right.
And I am fortunate enough to own, and you've driven actually, my 1953 Jaguar Mark 7.
That's a wonderful car. Yeah.
It's an amazing car.
Yeah, yeah.
And the original owner of that car, I'm the second owner of that car as well. It's amazing, but people keep Jaguars. Had it upgraded to this spec.
And this is interesting. This is the small block Chevy of England. It's the longest production run engine of just about any. It ran from 48 to well into the 80s.
Exactly.
Into the 90s, exactly. Same basic configuration. Because to the Europeans, the 6-cylinder is the perfect balance. Smooth, quiet. They were not so much for V8s like us. We automatically think any V8 is better than any 6, and that's not necessarily true. The Ford GT, just won Le Mans, or well, a few years ago, would prove that. You know, and this was, well, it was the fastest car you could get back in the day.
Another point to my point about conventional wisdom, that you have to have a V8 in order to have performance. What Jaguar achieved with this engine, which was acknowledged throughout the world, the balance of smoothness, power, and economy. Not that you bought a Jaguar for fuel economy, but nonetheless, it delivered performance at a level that was equal to that of many V8s.
That's right.
And also used less fuel.
I think it was grace, pace, and
Space.
Space, yeah, that was
space.
right.
Lots
yeah.
of space inside.
Talk about the trunk, yeah. yeah.
But this is an extraordinary car, and one which is also today, as a collector car, incredibly usable.
Yeah.
You talk about performance that you can use on the street and in modern traffic. This will keep up with absolutely any modern traffic.
Yeah.
There is a thing about cooling in these cars. And yes, you can fit a slightly larger radiator. You can certainly fit an electric auxiliary fan. The brakes are perfectly adequate for brakes of the period. You have to
Right.
keep your wits about you because
Right.
it's not, modern carbon ceramic brakes.
Right.
Which is one of the things that, much like a Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, this is a car with sort of 1970s accelerative performance
Right.
and 1950s stopping. So you
Right.
have to keep your wits about you at all times.
You know, kind of like the Porsche 911, they're not rare, but they are expensive. The only part that might befuddle a modern driver, non-synchro first. Why is it going, because people don't remember when you only had synchro on the top gears. you know.
Exactly.
But like, you have to come to a full stop and then put it into first gear.
And it's one of those things that also speaks to the powertrain, because if your car is moving, you can really take off in second gear without
Right,
a problem.
right, right.
If you come to a complete stop, yes, you definitely need first and need to take your time to get it.
Right.
Now let's look at another English landmark,
All right.
the Morgan. So this is a 1957 Morgan Plus 4, and here the story is, as I'm telling it, and I
Yes.
know you'll agree,
Yes.
how many times have you heard people say, oh yeah, Morgans, those are those wooden cars, or the cars with wooden chassis, or those cars, those old English sports cars that they make in a mill someplace that have no suspension.
Well, they did have the ash frame.
An ash-framed body.
Ash-framed
They have
body.
metal frames.
Right, okay.
So
yeah,
it's-
that's true. That is a kind of,
Yeah.
and it's the most frustrating car as you could possibly imagine.
How so?
Because you order it. I know people who ordered theirs in like 14 and got them in like 19 or 23,
You can't rush
That's what I mean.
these things.
Morgan owners shriek with delight when they tell the car will be ready in 7 years. Okay, great, thank you very much. It's just the funniest thing. They're handmade, small factory. The father, the grandfather, the great-grand, they all work there. I've been to the factory. It's a wonderful place. I mean, it's the way motoring used to be. In the old days, you'd build a car company and you would sell them to the people in your area. When it broke or you had warranty problems, you bring it back to
the
that
factory.
You go to another state and there'd be another car. Kind of like, remember C.R. Patterson? He was the first African-American to start a car company. Started around the turn of the century. It was very successful because he would sell them to people in the area in and around Ohio. And once Henry Ford came in and then the Depression, and they were out of business. But if you're an African American and you like cars, it's a piece of history. Most young African American men I meet don't know anything.
No idea
And they
about
love the
Patterson.
idea. They go,
Yeah.
what? They want to know. Because people that someone do something that you like, you think it started maybe with Ed Wellborn, first African American to be head of design at General Motors. No, it goes back further than that, and it's kind of interesting. But I digress here. Frustrating, the goofiest shift pattern you could imagine, and it's a 3-speed, not a 4-speed.
It's one of those things that is very interesting to me because this is traditional as traditional English sports car motoring could get. There's not much difference in terms of the driving experience driving a Morgan from the 1930s, a four-wheel Morgan from the 1930s, as it is driving this car from the late 1950s to driving one from the 1970s, for that matter. But they got all the elements right.
Right.
It is an experience that is the complete experience, and even the fact that the company lasted through the years, I mean, in the 1950s and early 60s, I mean, they survived on the U.S. market because they were not selling any in the U.K. at all. So
Right.
the U.S. market was really important to them, especially at the time this car was built. And by the time you got to the emissions controls, and as you well recall, the only Morgans you could buy were natural gas powered ones.
Right, right.
And but they have been powered by a variety of different engines over the years.
Right, whatever engine they could get and transmission they could get. Plus, you know, it has that classic, good things should have a certain amount of suffering involved to make you appreciate it. That English, even New England where I grew up, you had to read Ethan Frome and Silas Marner and all these depressing, horrible stories. It's just, see, life is awful, but here's one little shining good part of it. And this, you had to suffer to drive with these. Certainly you had to learn the shift pattern, just that pillar suspension that kind of, yeah. But again, if you like that type of thing, and I do, I find it, there's a certain masochistic tendency to owning one of these.
But you know, it's about involvement. It's not an automatic car.
Oh no,
in terms
you're
of,
involved.
You're involved at every
yeah.
moment.
Ooh.
It's like it's the closest thing we can get to today to daily veteran car motoring.
Right.
So you know you are involved in the process, and this is a car that you can actually use. People do take these on tours, on rallies. It will not kill you to spend an hour or 2 hours driving this car, despite what people say.
And plus you have to remember, this was in England. There were no motorways or highways yet. Everything was two-lane. In fact, many roads, you come to a bridge and people have to stop, and you have to let the other cars come through, and then you would go over. So, and motoring was a 40-mile-an-hour affair. You just kind of, and this is perfect for that. Once you get this up to a mile a minute, then it gets a little dicey. But charming is really the word to describe it, I think. It's just charming to drive. If you like the old school feel of things, yeah.
It's a car that delivers what it promises.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand that because they want it to be something else somehow.
That's right. That's because it promises very little. But it does meet that.
Expectations. Let's take a look under the hood.
Okay, here we go. I've never seen an engine bay with more, I mean, I can see the floor. It's amazing. I mean, it's just sort of dropped in there.
And again, very typical of cars of this time and this period and this type, where the owner typically did all of his or her own maintenance.
Right.
And so it was very easy to maintain and to run. And that was the most important thing because you wanted a car that could get you where you wanted to go and back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a flathead, it's a 3-speed, everything to make sure you don't go over 50 miles an hour. It's guaranteed in this car. But as long as you don't mind that, and it does have a charm, and it's a very pretty car to look at and see, you know. I find women seem, when I had it, women would stop, oh, what kind of car is that? Oh, that's pretty cool. Much like XKE Jaguars. I find women always like those too. The cars have, to me, the best cars have a male and female side to it. Like the Lamborghini Miura, very feminine with the eyelashes, masculine haunches on the back.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know, so, and this has a little bit of that too. So it's a charming car.
And I love the fact that it is a thoroughly modern 1957 period piece.
Right.
This is also a very special car as it relates to the Aldrin Automobile Museum. This is also a car donated to the museum, and was the very first car donated to the museum after it opened.
Okay.
And an absolutely wonderful example, a car that brings smiles to everyone's faces, whether they're looking at the car or driving the car.
Yeah.
It's
so
fantastic.
classic example of they could give it away.
Now, our last car we're going to talk about today is, I know, one of our favorites. Last but certainly not least, this 1962 Chevrolet Corvair Monza Spyder Club Coupe. My very first car was a Corvair.
Right.
A 1963 Monza convertible. And I was so ecstatic to get this car. I was in college, and I'd always loved Corvairs because I thought that they were the most European American car.
They were. Ed Cole was a genius. He was fighting he saw the future Volkswagen, what was doing, people were buying those, and air-cooled seemed like the way to go. You lose all that fuss with water pumps and all this kind of nonsense. and developed this flat six. And he developed that as a six, not a four, because Americans like power. I think it's one of the great cars of all time. It was the cover of Time magazine. It was a huge hit. It took a little while to get on with the general public because they were so infatuated with power and V8s and Hemi engines and all that kind of stuff. So it was sold as kind of a second car, or the wife's car.
Oh, sure,
all
absolutely.
those kind of terms they used to use on it. And then they made it sporty with a 4-speed on the floor, and you started seeing ads with the string-back driving gloves and all that kind of stuff. And they actually won. A guy named Yanko, Yanko Stinger, the Yanko Corvette, but his first car was, Don Yanko was out of Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania. He took 100 of these cars. Chevrolet gave him his own. He was the Carroll Shelby of Chevrolet. And he turned them into the Yanko Stinger, had 3 stages, 160 horse, 180 horse, 190, and then there was a racing model. A 4-speed transmission, and he beat Porsche. He won the SCCA championship in '66 against Porsche, because Porsche was a 4, this was a 6, had more horsepower, made it handle. Everybody knows the Ralph Nader story, which was pretty much debunked by the SAE by 19. They said it was no more or less dangerous than
any other rear-engine car and any other car with swing axles, for that matter.
Well, that was a classic case of, when the book came out, Unsafe at Any Speed, they actually sold more Corvairs than they did copies of the book. And then General Motors was so incensed that this young lawyer was coming after them that they decided to set him up and get him in a compromising situation with a woman and all these and it backfired spectacularly. And suddenly the New York Times, why is General Motors, why is the biggest corporation in the world going after a 28-year-old lawyer? And the book sales went through the roof. The book actually was much harder, I thought, on Volkswagen.
Yes.
Because it had the gas tank in the front, but for whatever reason. Anyway, it was a shame.
This is an amazing car, and not simply because a Corvair was my first car, but again, thinking about conventional wisdom. The big one in the room, of course, is the idea, oh, these cars are completely unsafe and they will kill you.
Right.
Not true. The second is that, oh, well, you know, it was sort of this quirky, strange, under-engineered and underdeveloped car that wasn't really competitive. And what I love about the Spyders, the turbocharged cars, when you compare their specs directly to a Porsche, not just the Don Yanko racing versions, but this car, you walk into your Chevrolet dealer, you buy the car, flat 6, turbocharged, 150 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 10.3 seconds.
Right.
A 1962 Porsche 356 Carrera 2 had less horsepower and was slower to 0 to 60 than this car.
And the other thing is, unconventional wisdom, that it was a failure. It was, when you compare it to the Mustang.
Right.
But they sold 1.8 million of these, but Mustang by that time sold 3 million. So this, it's a failure. And it's a shame because it competed against the Mustang. Mustang had a V8 and more horsepower, and yeah, it was a little tricky. This was, I think, the thinking man's version.
And it's also, you bring up a very good point about market positioning, which can spell success or death to a car. When you had a car that was initially conceived as a basic import fighter, an anti-Volkswagen, and then you also position it as the Porsche fighter and then later the Mustang fighter, you get confused and what it is meant to do. And to your point about what measures of success are today versus then, there's no contest. And also the fact that when GM saw what Ford had done by taking the Falcon and putting it in a new body shell and offering all these engine options, it cost Ford nothing to do that.
Right.
Whereas they were dedicated special assembly lines, an engine that was used in no other car, a platform shared with no other car. It's like, you know, why are we doing this?
Plus they made a truck version, the Ram side, which I have, which was the first time since the invention of the pickup truck, somebody made one that didn't look like a pickup truck, bombed tremendously because people get into, oh no, that's what it's supposed to look like. You know, so it's interesting. A very misunderstood car. Also, the very first turbocharged car was the F-85 Oldsmobile.
Yes.
But they only produced a few of those. This was the first mass-produced car. And the F-85, you had to get their rocket fuel, you know, the stuff you had to buy to mix it. It's crazy. But it's interesting. But turbos were like, what? What is that? It was just...
Exactly. It's like, well, again, thinking about the whole jet airplane mania of the 1950s, the idea that you had jet engine technology in your car was also quite something. And the fact that the Corvair is a family car. I mean, you literally could take the kids to school in a turbocharged 4-speed sports car.
Right.
This car, as we mentioned before, also came from the Nick Begovich collection. And in fact, this was Nick's first wife, Joan's car. She was a high school teacher, so
Yeah.
she drove this to school every day.
That's funny.
So it was quite an amazing thing, and again, a tribute to how people looked at Corvairs at the time when they were new.
What's interesting, when I drive my 66 Corsa, which I think is the pinnacle of it.
My favorite car, by the
Yeah.
way, in your entire collection.
Yeah, and it has the reworked suspension, which they updated after they had the problems. Kids ask me, is that a Carmen gear? And I've met car fans who've never heard of Corvair. Guys in their 20s and 30s. What? Chevrolet, what?
And especially the second generation
Yeah,
Corvair.
yeah.
People, if they know Corvair, they think of the first generation Corvairs like this. They have no idea that the second generation
Right.
existed. Again, among the most beautiful cars also ever created by General Motors, those second generation Corvairs. But going back to the design also of this car, I said that it struck me as a very European car. This car actually influenced a lot of European cars after it came out. The NSU, a number of other cars were actually very much styled on the theme of this Corvair.
And it's interesting, it also worked the other way too. It scared manufacturers to death. Look, let's go back to the Panhard system. Engine in the front, transmission in the middle, rear end. Don't try anything new. And really nothing new came along for a long time. I mean, you had design changes, but nothing mechanical or engineering, because it looked like General Motors just, threw out the baby with the bath, whatever you want to call it,
They went out on a big limb with this, the F85, the transaxle and the Tempest.
Right.
I mean, they were really doing some real cutting edge things.
The rope transmission.
Yes, the rope transmission,
Yeah, they used to call
exactly.
it, yeah.
But I think, again, this really proves the fact that don't take at face value what you think you know about the Corvair. I mean, you and I certainly know better, but I think more of the world needs to discover exactly what
Well, the
these
other
are.
thing, and it's such a uniquely American thing, I don't think I've ever seen this on a European car. Fake wire wheel hubcaps, And so, has this got wire wheels? No, those are just hubcaps that look like wire wheels.
Interestingly enough, in the early 1950s, late 1940s, this was also a very American idea adapted to Italian design. You see a lot of custom-built Italian cars
Right.
in the early 1950s that have fake wire wheel
Yeah.
covers. It's fairly hysterical.
Yeah, but it's an American thing.
Okay, so we've had a chat about these three cars. Our 1952 Jaguar XK120 M fixed-head coupe, our 1957 Morgan Plus 4, and our 1962 Chevrolet Corvair Monza Spyder Club Coupe.
Well, this is tricky because you could get these for as little as $800 not that long ago. So this one being the turbo model with the manual transmission, it's going to make it a little more valuable. Conventional wisdom, which is not always correct, would probably say this would be the cheapest because they built 1.8 million of them. You
Not necessarily the cheapest. Which one has appreciated the most in
which one
value?
appreciated the most in
Because
value?
we know which one's going to be the most valuable car here.
Well, I think the most valuable car will be the Jaguar, but those have held their value. So I don't know if 5 years ago, they might have even gone down a little bit from 5 years ago, but I think they probably have. I've seen them as high as 150, now they see them for 75, 80. So I'd say maybe that has remained static. The Morgan is an acquired taste. You have to, I don't think anybody buys one of these not knowing what they're getting beforehand. I would say this has probably gone up in the last 5 years. All right, let's make the Corvair. I was going to make it last, but let's say this number one, number two. Well, no, and I think last might be the Jaguar because I think they reached their peak about 10 years ago, and now they seem to be hovering. So, okay, let's go 1, 2, 3.
All righty. In the last 5 years,
Yeah.
a Corvair Monza Spyder Club Coupe might have been had for about $9,000. Today, it would cost you about $11,000 to buy. So nice appreciation there.
All right.
The Morgan, 5 years ago, would have been about $40,000. Today, it would be about $50,000.
Okay.
And the Jaguar, 5 years ago, 120 fixed-head M spec would have been about $150,000, and today it'd be $165,000.
Well, that's interesting. You see, I see them all day long on Bring a Trailer for $75,000.
Not an M spec. an original M-spec car.
Okay. Well, that's what I mean. This one
Yeah.
is unique, low
I'm
mileage.
not taking the Begovich
Yeah,
connection
okay.
in here, just an M-spec in very good
All right.
condition.
Yeah, okay.
So the winner is the Corvair.
Well, I did say the Corvair.
You did say the Corvair.
All right.
Unbelievable. He said the Corvair.
Well, using Donald's trick technology, this is why he would be an excellent car salesman. Hey, my wallet's gone. Okay, I remember these were $800, even though I still picked this. All right, but I'm just going to take my win and go. I'm not going to complain. Hey, see you later. Thank you.